I find myself wondering what it would look like to actually be blinded with science. I feel like that's a horror movie that needs to be made. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to it in the description below, and it's going to give you a sense of what we do here at the Horror Movie Syllabus, which, in short, is that we look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. Now, we're not going to be doing that today. We're going to be doing something slightly different because this is our Doctorate Level series. This is where we revisit a subgenre that we've already talked about before. I already did a video on this, and we kind of give you a quick recap of what we talked about previously, but then we explore a new 4th Doctorate Level selection. This is a movie that'll maybe be a little bit deeper cut, a little bit more esoteric, a little bit lesser known, something like that, to just kind of keep the conversation going, keep exploring these subgenres a little bit deeper than what we did in the previous video. And the subgenre that we're going to revisit today is the science and medicine subgenre. And as I discussed in the previous video on this, I wanted to look at movies where science and medicine play like a major plot point or a major theme role in the movie. Because there's a lot of horror movies where science and medicine is part of it. But these were movies where it really was like a big piece of the plot or a big theme in the movie that it was kind of front and center, focused on it. That was how I made the distinction of what was going to be discussed in the video. And we did discuss that how these movies tend to be a little bit more intellectual and make you think a little bit more. They have a little bit more of a philosophical bent to them. Kind of a lot of these, ideas of whether or not science is appropriate, the particular, experiment or whatever is going on is appropriate morally and societally. And it's really interesting stuff to me. I tend to like these kind of movies. I was explaining that in the previous video that these are movies that kind of work for me. And so I was really excited to talk about those movies that we talked about in the video. And we're going to go ahead and give you a recap of what it was I talked about right now. The first movie that we talked about in the previous science and medicine video was Flatliners. And I talked about how at the time that it came out, it was a really cool cast, with Kiefer Sutherland and Julia Roberts, Oliver Platt, and one of the Baldwin boys, Kevin Bacon. I talked about how these actors at the time were kind of it actors, and it really gave it a youth appeal. It was a really broad appeal for younger people like me at the time who would want to go see this because of these cool actors and these young people doing really interesting things with science that really kind of becomes more occult and dangerous stuff and exploring death. Talked also a little bit about the director Joel Schumacher, who had directed Lost Boys at that point and was not really as maligned as he was later on for like the Batman movies, and how his look in this movie is really cool. But I also talked about how it hasn't maybe aged as well as I would have thought. It's not quite as deep as I thought it was when I was younger. It doesn't really explore as much about the meaning of death as I thought it did back in the day when I revisited it. It's still okay. It's not as deep as it should have been or could have been, but it's still a very entertaining movie. It was still a big hit, and it's still definitely one that was worth checking out and worth your time if you haven't seen it before. And the next movie that we looked at was The Autopsy of Jane Doe. We talked about this one, unlike Flatliners, wasn't a big hit and seems to have found its audience post theatrical release. It really kind of found its second life on like streaming home video, things like that, and people really have gravitated towards it. It's kind of become a kind of a cult favorite movie. We talked a little bit about that director, Andre Øvredal, who's got a really distinctive look. He's done Troll Hunter, a few other movies we've talked about on the channel. We like him quite a bit, and he's done a really sharp job on this one. And we talked about the cast. We talked about Emile Hirsch and Brian Cox and the chemistry the two of them have and the gravitas that they're bringing to this movie, which is kind of just like a simple horror movie, but it's not that simple. It's got this really cool mystery at the heart of it that drives the movie that is pretty compelling and goes to some really ambitious places. I don't know that it 100% nails everything that it's trying to do, but it has some interesting things to say about things like feminism and patriarchy and society. And again, I didn't want to spoil it then. I don't want to spoil it now, but it's definitely one that's worth checking out if you haven't seen it before. Kind of a little bit of a hidden gem, although a lot of people know about it these days, but it's one that a lot of people haven't seen. So if you haven't seen it, again, definitely worth your time to check out. And of course, the last movie that we talked about in the video was The Fly, which is, of course, a bona fide horror classic from David Cronenberg, one of the greatest horror directors of all time. So great that I gave him his own subgenre. So that tells you something right there. And I talked a little bit about how this movie arguably should be in the body horror subgenre, and I didn't put it there. I put it here because I was really fascinated by the science in this movie, the idea of this teleportation device that he's trying to create, and how it leads to all the problems, of course, and the technical aspects of that, the societal aspects of that, and how it would have an impact on our society. This stuff is all really fascinating to me. But then, of course, what takes front and center in this movie is that body horror, is that gore. The special effects in this movie, top notch. They're incredible. The actors in this movie, Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis, bringing their A games, really captivating, really interesting couple. The chemistry is great. The story is really tragic, and everything in this movie shines. But the thing that I really wanted to put a shine on more was the science aspect of it, because it's something that I think gets lost in the shuffle of all the other things that people praise about this movie. So that's why I chose to put it here, to shine that light on the science aspect of it, because it definitely warranted that. But that's a movie you've probably already seen, but see it again and pay more attention to the science of it. Really fascinating stuff. So that's going to be our recap of the previous video on science and medicine horror movies. And now it's time for a doctorate level selection. The doctorate level selection for our science and medicine horror subgenre is Excision. And Excision came out in 2012 and was written and directed by somebody named Richard Bates Jr., who I'm not very familiar with. And this is his feature film debut. But when I looked at his filmography, it seems like he's done a handful now of horror comedy type movies with like a comedy edge to them, which honestly tracks a bit considering the tone of this movie, which is something of a black comedy. But we're going to get into that in just a second. Now, first, if you haven't seen it before, the movie follows a teenage girl who is awkward, kind of a social outcast, has some emotional problems, and she's an aspiring surgeon. She wants to be a surgeon, but she's having to deal with bullies at school, a sister who's dealing with a serious illness, overbearing religious mother who's always on her case and causing her a lot of grief. And she's also having these dreams that are really involved in some really strange body horrific type things that are actually kind of a turn on for her, and hijinks of all kinds abound at this point. I'm going to stop there and not spoil the movie for you. In fact, I know that the summary I just gave is a little bit on the vague side because it is almost kind of more like a really bizarre character study. But what you really need to know about this movie is that it is kind of a funny black comedy horror movie. It's got horrific things in it, and it really gets pretty dark, especially towards the end. But it really is mostly kind of like a teen dramedy. There's a lot of teen aspects to this. You know, you got this girl in school, and it's really following this one girl. And that girl's played by Annalyn McCord. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with her, but she was a standout character on the show Nip Tuck. She was also on the revamped 90210 several years ago. And what you need to know about her is she is a very attractive woman. She's very model looking, you know, very stereotypical blonde, beautiful model looking girl. And the character in this is not that at all. She is kind of dumpy with bad skin, hunched shoulders, brunette, just kind of looking like a social outcast, intentionally. And the fact that they cast Annalyn McCord in this role is very strange because physically speaking, and from everything else that I've seen her in, at least, this is not the person you would cast for this role. And in fact, I kept expecting it to be some sort of situation where, like, an ugly duckling thing where she becomes beautiful at some point in the movie. Like, there would be some thing that would happen to her that would make her become, like, looking like what you normally think Annalyn McCord looks like. But that didn't happen in the movie. That's not what the movie's about. It really is just about this awkward social outcast. And it's weird that they took Annalyn McCord and just put all this makeup on her. It's actually really good makeup and really kind of hysterical if you know what she looks like, because it's almost comical to see her look this bad. They do a really good job of like giving her, like, bad skin and things like that, and just make her look washed out and pale and kind of sickly. And it's really jarring just to realize that she's almost unrecognizable in there. But she does crush this role. She's really good in this movie, and it's one of the things I liked about it the most is that she's really, really nailing this role and really delivering on something that is angsty but also really funny. She's got this funny deadpan delivery, saying some really bizarre stuff, and it's a really bizarre character, but she kind of grounds it in a way that makes you feel like you like her, even though she's so weird and really not a likable person. You still are kind of drawn to her, and I'm going to credit Annalyn McCord with that. I think that she gives a really compelling performance. What's interesting is how many other people are in this movie, because this movie feels like a kind of a lower budget, kind of an indie film. Not low, but it's not like shot on video or anything like that. But it's like it's definitely not a mainstream type movie, and it's not one that looks like it has a ton of money behind it or anything like that. But there's a lot of names here. You've got Ariel Winters playing the sister. She's from a Modern Family. She plays the sickly sister. You've got Tracy Lords playing the mom, and she actually is kind of one of the standouts of this movie. She really is something of a scene stealer. She plays this religious mom who's really on the case of her daughter, and she is great in this movie. She's playing it kind of like hammy and kind of big, and it really fits the tone of the movie because this movie is kind of absurdly funny. It's like I said, it's like a black comedy and it's ridiculous. And Tracy Lords got the assignment. She knew what movie she was in, and she nails this. But what's really surprising are the supporting cast, because there's a lot of actors in this movie that get maybe two scenes that probably have maybe 5 minutes, definitely less than 10 minutes of screen time. And we're talking about like Malcolm McDowell, Marley Matlin, Ray Wise, John Waters. Like, I don't know how they got these people to be in this movie, because I can't imagine they pay them a lot, because it doesn't seem like it has that kind of money. But they got them to be in it, and every one of them does a really cool job with their role. There are memorable moments in the movie from each one of them, but it's just kind of astounding to see this cast. It's a really good cast, and again, everybody's bringing a quality performance here. Anna Lynn McCord being, of course, the centerpiece and the one that really works for me. And while she is in the makeup for much the whole time, the character never experiences some sort of a transformation or anything like that. She is having these dreams, and these dreams are very striking. There's these striking visuals. These dreams are surreal, and the images are very gory and stylistic. Like these really like stark white things with blood, and it's just really effectively gory, cool, dreamlike sequences. And in those sequences, she is a little bit more pretty and stereotypically pretty and looking a little bit more like normal, but that's the extent of using her differently. Is like in her dreams she looks a little bit different, but the dreams are interesting because the way it winds up being like this sexual impetus for her, it's driving her fascination with like body horror and being a surgeon and cutting people in blood and stuff like that. That's where the horror aspects of this start coming in, because again, it's mostly a teen drama with some comedy in it that meets body horror, but the body horror is somewhat light, and it really is leaning more towards this like ridiculous black comedy and this teen drama angst that is all kind of working really well for me. It all works for me really, really well. But then it gets dark, and it works really well when it's getting dark. You've got this religious subplot, and you've got Annalyn McCord's character who's pushing back against this religious stuff that's being imposed upon her, and that resonates for me. I'm really digging that. And then, she's got this desire to be a surgeon, and all this starts to come to a head. The bullies that she's dealing with, her sick sister, everything starts to come together at the end, and it goes full-blown horror. At the very end, it goes full-blown horror. Now, it takes a little while to get there, but I was enjoying the ride because I was enjoying the teenage drama stuff, the high school stuff, the weird comedy stuff, the acerbic wit of this character. All of that stuff was working for me really, really well. So I wasn't even mad about the fact that we were only getting these dream sequences of horror, and we weren't really getting like full true horror till the very end of the movie. I was fine with that. It worked with me just fine. And that's the thing. This movie kind of goes a place that I think is maybe not that hard to figure out, but it's still kind of shocking that it full on goes there. And I love that. I love that. And I'm not the only one. This movie was pretty well received critically. It's not a super well known movie. I'd call this kind of a hidden gem of a movie, like more hidden than Autopsy of Jane Doe, frankly. This is a movie that a lot of people don't seem to know much about, which is why I want to talk about it as a doctorate level selection, because I feel this is one that people need to see. They need to, needs to get a little bit more buzz about it because it's really good. I like it a lot. And I feel like nobody's talking about it. So this is why I chose it as doctorate. And I'm definitely telling you, if you like this stuff, again, it's not super gory. It's not super, but it is body horror. But it's not like The Substance or anything like that. So I think most people could hang with this. But if you're not sure, maybe check out, a little bit of reviews or do some research on it ahead of time. But I would say this is one that's probably going to relate for almost anyone. I think it is a winner. If you've got a dark sense of humor in particular, I'd say this one is for you. So check it out. So that's our doctorate level selection for the science and medicine horror subgenre. But I've also got an extra credit selection for you because this is a movie I've been wanting to talk about for a minute, and I'm finally getting an opportunity to do it. So the extra credit selection I'm picking is The Island of Dr. Moreau. and The Island of Dr. Moreau came out in 1996. And you'll notice I'm going with the 96 movie, not the 1977 movie with Burt Lancaster, which I could have picked on instead, but I'm picking this one for reasons we're going to get into in a minute. But this was directed by John Frankenheimer, but he was not the original director, and we're going to get into that in just a minute. We got a lot to talk about, so why don't we just go ahead and jump into it. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie starts with a castaway being saved and being rescued and then taken to this island where this mysterious doctor is conducting experiments, and he seems to be trying to create human animal hybrids in an effort to kind of create a new and perfect species. And of course, these animal human hybrids have all kinds of issues. They are maybe not necessarily as docile as he'd want them to be, and it may not be the easiest thing in the world to keep them under his control. And if they escape, hijinks going to abound, and you know they do. But I'm going to go ahead and stop there so as not spoil the movie for you. But this movie is based on the H.G. Wells novel, and it is a pretty famous story that's been adapted a couple of different times. And this is probably, I don't know if it's the most recent version, but it's the most recent version with the title Island of Dr. Moreau on it. And when this movie came out, it was a big deal, in no small part because it was starring Marlon Brando, the legendary actor Marlon Brando, and Val Kilmer, by the way. And that was a pretty odd pairing and a pretty big deal for Marlon Brando to be in this movie. And again, a really well-known property, H.G. Wells. It's a pretty famous story. So this had a lot of pedigree behind it. And it was being directed originally by a man named Richard Stanley. And Richard Stanley got fired about a week or two into the production and replaced with John Frankenheimer because of all kinds of chaos on the set. And this is why I'm picking the movie instead of the 77 version or anything else, is because the production on this movie is probably more interesting than the movie itself, which honestly isn't very good. It's pretty much a bad movie, but the making of the movie is fascinating. It's a whole mess. You had a hurricane that caused delays and created damage to sets and things like that. You had numerous casting changes. Like at one point, Bruce Willis was supposed to be in the movie. Rob Morrow was supposed to be in the movie. James Woods was supposed to be in the movie, and they had to drop out for various reasons. And Marlon Brando was kind of the draw, right? People wanted to work with Brando, so that was a big deal. But if you know anything about Marlon Brando, he is notoriously difficult to work with. He doesn't want to learn his lines. He might not want to show up on set. He can be really cantankerous, and you just kind of have to kowtow to him because he is so famous and such a big deal. He kind of does whatever he wants, and you just got to make it work. Not to mention Val Kilmer's on the set, and this is Val Kilmer at the height of his A, popularity, and B, jerk behavior. He was well known for being very difficult on set, and he was being very difficult on this set too. And it is interesting because you have all these other actors involved. You have Fairuza Balk from The Craft, who was great. David Thewlis, very famous actor David Thewlis, who winds up being the lead, but he wasn't the original lead. He came in at the last minute. Then you have like Ron Perlman and Mark Dacascos and Tamura Morrison playing some of these hybrid human animal people, and they're in makeup and stuff like that. And by the way, the makeup is actually pretty solid. It actually is pretty strong makeup effects in the movie that looks good. But the movie's behind the scenes with all these cast changes and with Brando acting out and Val Kilmer acting out and them hating each other and not getting along at all and fighting, at least supposedly, depends on who you talk to on this, it's a mess behind the scenes. So it feels like the movie's going to be doomed right from the get-go, and it kind of was. And that's the thing. There's a whole documentary about this called Lost Soul, and things like the doomed journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau. Something that's a mouthful of a title. And it kind of goes through, from Stanley's perspective, all the different issues that he was coming up with and running into. And then, of course, Frankenheimer eventually wound up having to deal with that when he signed on to fill in as director. And if I'm being honest, the movie has no directorial flair whatsoever. It's a very serviceable job. It's just there. Directorially, it's just there. It's hitting the beats. It's getting the job done. And I think that's probably because Frankenheimer was probably spending most of his time and energy managing the offset or the behind the scenes chaos, all the nightmares having to do with the actors and the production just being basically trying to fall apart, right? You've got Brando being very eccentric and weird, and it's kind of cool because it's like he fits the role being kind of eccentric and weird. Like it's an eccentric character, this crazy weird makeup on his face that's supposed to be like for bugs or whatever, and like he's just kind of larger than life in real life. And so him being in the movie, larger than life in the movie, really makes sense. And he really is kind of great in this movie. Like he is not really, he's not good, but he's big and gregarious and crazy. And it works for this movie because this movie winds up being unintentionally very campy. It's a very serious take. They're not trying to be funny, but it is funny because it's just a mess of a movie. Because Brando is just being Brando, and he's being so ridiculous here. Because Val Kilmer is doing all kinds of crazy stuff in this movie, and it works. It works. In fact, the drag of the movie is David Thewlis, who didn't get the memo and isn't having any kind of fun in the movie whatsoever. But the movie works for me because of this. It is notoriously a bad movie. I would argue it's so bad it's a good movie. Now, your mileage may vary on that one because it's not for everybody. A lot of people might find it a little dull and feel like it runs a little long. I think it's hilarious. I think it's a lot of fun. The first time I saw the movie, I was disappointed because I was expecting a very straight take on the H.G. Wells story, and it's a mess. It's not a good movie, and I was kind of down on it, disappointed for sure. But revisiting it over the years, and then also learning the reasons why it's so bad and why it didn't work, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating movie. It's fascinating to watch it, knowing how much these people didn't get along, knowing how much of a mess it is, knowing all of that. All that said, unironically, I do think Brando's good in the movie. I think Val Kilmer's good in the movie. I think Fairuza Balk's really good in the movie. And she's got charisma and charm to spare. It's working for me in certain levels, which makes the parts that don't work that much more glaring. So I picked this one because it is notoriously bad. It's critically maligned. People hated it. It was a box office bomb. It was a huge failure. It really created a lot of bad reputations for people. Val Kilmer being one who, to this day, claims he wasn't nearly as bad as people were reporting on the set. Not sure I believe that so much. He even talks about this movie a little bit in his documentary that he did before he passed on. And so it's a lot of drama behind the scenes. Honestly, maybe check out the documentary before you check out that movie instead, because maybe it's more interesting. But I do think the movie's worth a watch because it is so bad it's good, because of how crazy the behind the scenes were, and what they wound up with on screen is remarkable considering all the challenges. I'm really impressed with it in a very tongue-in-cheek kind of way. It is not a good movie, but I'm telling you, maybe you should check it out anyways. So that's my thoughts on a doctorate level selection and extra credit selection for the science and medicine subgenre for horror. I really enjoy these movies. Excision in particular, I think is great, and I think you should check it out. Dr. Moreau, well, we just talked about that, but definitely this subgenre is one that you should be exploring. If you're not really checking out movies in this subgenre, you should be checking them out because they are definitely worth your time. They'll make you think. They'll make you really inquire about things and get a little introspective. And who doesn't like that in their horror movies? Now, what I like in horror is Horror Trivia Pursuit, right? So I'm going to answer a question from this card live on camera. And since we're talking about Excision, which is kind of body horror and kind of gory, I'm going to go with the gore category on the card. And here's the question. In 1970's The Wizard of Gore, what is the first name of the magnificent magician at the center of the film? And I don't remember. I have no clue. I think the clue in the card is Magnificent Magician. I think that's part of like the title, but I'll be honest with you, it has been a minute since I've seen this movie. I'm pretty sure we talked about this on the channel, but I'm not 100% sure. I feel like we talked about this on the channel, or we talked about the remake on the channel, one or the other. I can't remember, but it's been a while, and I haven't seen the movie in a long time. It's a Herschel Gordon Lewis movie. It's very, gory, and it leans into the gore. That's part of like the notoriousness of it and why it's there, because it's not a particularly great movie, but the gore is really outstanding and stuff. But look, I'm bad with character names in general. We all know this. I've talked about it numerous times on the channel previously. And so, of course, there's no way I'm going to remember this. I don't really know. So I'm going to be taking a stab in the dark. But I'll give you one clue is I think that the name starts with an M. I think that's the whole point is the alliteration. It's something with an M. And it's like, the Magnificent Magician. And so I'm pretty sure it's a name that starts with an N. I mean, M, excuse me. And so but I'm not sure. I don't know what it is. So, I don't know. I'm going to guess. To lock in an answer, I'm going to take a shot in the dark. And I know it's not. I know it's not right. Okay, but I'm going to guess Marcus. Marcus is my guess, and I know it's going to be wrong. But the card says Montag. 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 I was never going to get that, guys. I was never going to remember that. Never, ever, ever. So yeah, totally got that one wrong. A little bit embarrassing, but I mean, honestly, that movie's old. I don't remember it very well. It came out before I was born, for Christ's sake. So did you guys get it right? Did you remember that name, Montag? Did you guys get it right? And if not, what did you guess? And did you guess something with an M like I told you to, or did you go off on a limb and do your own thing? Let me know in the comments below. I'd like to hear wrong answers. I'd also like to know what you guys think about science and medicine, horror movies. If you've got any other cool ones that are good recommendations, things I should check out. Maybe I haven't seen it before. Maybe I'll do a video about that in the future. But until then, I'm just going to say, class dismissed.